I've seen a lot of people walk into this courtroom believing they were untouchable. Businessmen, property owners, people who've spent years learning how to use authority as a shield. But the morning this case came across my bench, I felt something different. Not anger, not impatience, quiet fury. Because the woman sitting at that defense table hadn't done anything wrong. She had been late on part of her rent. She had communicated. She had paid what she could. She had done exactly what responsible tenants are supposed to do. And one morning, she walked up to her front door with her 2 kids beside her, and the lock had been changed. No notice, no court order, no warning, just a locked door. And her children's backpacks, medication, birth certificates, and every piece of their life still sealed inside. If you believe that no landlord, no matter how long he's been in the business, gets to do that to a family, stay with this story. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe right now, because what this man said inside my courtroom will stay with you long after this video ends. Let me take you back to the beginning. She was a single mother in her early 30s, not a headline, not a statistic, just a woman doing the math every single day. Rent, groceries, childcare, bills, all of it calculated carefully on a budget that had almost no room for error. After her marriage ended quietly and painfully, she became the only one responsible for keeping her family steady. She worked 2 jobs when she could manage it, one during the day, another in the evenings when she could arrange care for her kids. Some weeks were manageable, some were a test of endurance, but she never stopped showing up. What mattered most to her was stability. Same apartment, same school, same routine. She wasn't chasing anything extraordinary. She was just trying to make sure her children could sleep through the night without worry. She paid her rent on time most months, every single month, without exception, until one month came that didn't go as planned. Her hours got cut at work. The timing was bad. The math didn't work. She didn't disappear. She didn't ignore the situation. She reached out to the landlord immediately, explained what had happened honestly, paid what she could, and asked for a short extension. Days, not weeks. She already knew when her next check was coming. She had a plan. The landlord responded. He acknowledged the message. He knew exactly what was happening and why. That's important because it means this was never a surprise to him. But something shifted in the days that followed, because one morning, she got her kids ready for school, packed their lunches, picked up their bags, and walked them to the front door of the apartment they had lived in for years. She put her key in the lock. It didn't turn. She tried again and again. That's when she saw it. The lock had been replaced overnight. No note on the door, no paperwork, no warning of any kind, just a new lock, a locked door, and her life on the other side of it. I want you to sit with that moment for just a second. Not the legal violation of it, the human reality. Her kids were standing right behind her, old enough to understand something was very wrong, young enough to still believe their mother could fix anything. Her youngest needed daily medication. It was inside. Their school records, their birth certificates, the family photos on the shelf, their clothes, their toys, everything that made that apartment a home was sitting just a few feet away, completely inaccessible. She called the landlord immediately. Her voice was shaking, but she stayed calm. His response was 3 words, "Not my problem." She begged, not hysterically, not dramatically, just a mother asking for access, just long enough to get her children's belongings, just enough to get through the next few hours. He hung up, and standing there in the morning air with her children beside her, she understood something terrifying. He wasn't confused about the law. He knew exactly what he was doing. In the United States, there is a legal process for eviction. It isn't complicated, but it is firm. A landlord must provide written notice. There are mandatory waiting periods. There must be court involvement. A judge must sign off. Only then can possession of the property legally change hands. Changing locks without following that process is called a self-help eviction. It is illegal in nearly every state in this country. The law doesn't make that distinction carelessly. It exists precisely to prevent what was happening to this woman on that sidewalk, to stop landlords from deciding on their own schedule, on their own terms, that a family no longer has a home. But this landlord had been in the business a long time, and somewhere along the way, he had decided the rules were optional when the person on the other side had no power to fight back. That was his first mistake. His second was showing up in my courtroom. He walked in like a man who had already won. Relaxed posture, calm expression, the kind of ease that comes from someone who has never been seriously challenged in situations like this. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't hesitate for even a moment. "It's my property," he said. "My rules." He said it the way someone recites a motto, like it was a principle he had lived by for years, not a moral one, a tactical one. He explained that she had been late on rent, not unpaid, late. But in his framing, the distinction didn't matter. She had failed to meet her obligation, and he had responded accordingly. I asked him about the written eviction notice. He shifted his weight slightly, but his confidence didn't break. "I gave verbal notice," he said. "She knew what was happening." I didn't respond immediately. I let that answer sit in the room. He took the silence as an invitation to keep talking. He spoke about tenants taking advantage of landlords, about how the system was tilted against property owners, about how he had been doing this for years and knew exactly how it worked. I asked him about the children. His answer changed the entire atmosphere of the room. "That's not my responsibility," he said flatly. "I'm running a business, not a charity." Nobody gasped. Nobody reacted loudly. There was just a quiet stillness, the kind that happens when people hear something and understand immediately that the person speaking doesn't see other people the way they should. I raised my eyes from the file. He didn't notice. He kept going. Each time I tried to ask a direct question, he answered with an argument. Each time I tried to clarify, he interrupted. He talked over the tenant, over the evidence, and eventually over me. I gave him one warning. "Sir, you are not going to interrupt me." He nodded, then interrupted again. That's when I understood exactly who I was dealing with. Not a man who had made a mistake, a man who genuinely believed that his years in the business placed him above accountability. That experience was a substitute for compliance, that confidence could replace the law. He said it himself. "I've been doing this for years. I know how this works." And then he made the mistake that sealed everything. He glanced toward the single mother, gestured in her direction, and said casually, almost offhand, "Single moms like to play the victim when things don't go their way." The room didn't erupt. It froze, not dramatically, completely. He seemed unaware of what he had just revealed. He was still riding the momentum of his own arrogance, still explaining himself, still performing the role of a reasonable man being inconvenienced by technicalities. "I'm just saying," he continued, smiling slightly, "they use their kids to get sympathy. Business is business." I closed the file in front of me, slowly, deliberately. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. When I spoke again, my voice was quieter than it had been all morning. "You don't get to decide who deserves sympathy," I said, "and you don't get to ignore the law because it's inconvenient." He opened his mouth. I raised one hand. "No," I said, "you've spoken enough." That was the turning point. Not for me. I had seen enough before that moment. But for him, because that's when the courtroom stopped being a place where his confidence could protect him and started being a place where the facts had all the power. I began with the basics. Verbal notice means nothing under the statute. Written notice is not a suggestion. It is a legal requirement. Without it, the eviction process cannot lawfully begin. Period. He had not provided written notice. Changing locks without a court order is an illegal lockout. It doesn't matter how long the rent has been late. It doesn't matter what the tenant said or didn't say. Without a court order, No landlord has the right to remove access to a tenant's home. He had changed the locks without a court order. Then I turned to the evidence. I held up the text messages, his text messages, the ones he had apparently forgotten existed. Messages from the tenant explaining her situation clearly and respectfully. Messages confirming partial payment. Messages asking for a short extension. And messages where he acknowledged receiving every single one. You knew she was trying to pay, I said. You knew she hadn't disappeared. You had proof of communication and proof of partial payment before you ever touched that lock. He started to speak. I stopped him. I'm not finished. Next came the payment receipts, documented, time-stamped, showing exactly how much had been paid and when. Then the photographs, clear images of the apartment door, taken the morning the locks were changed. No notice posted, no court paperwork, no legal process of any kind, just a new lock on a door that used to belong to a family. His posture began to change. The certainty in his shoulders faded. And then I told him something he had not expected. This was not the first time. The court records attached to his file told a story he had never expected to tell out loud. Complaints from prior tenants, not lawsuits. Most of them couldn't afford that, but complaints. Names on record, a pattern that looked uncomfortably familiar. Late rent, sudden lock changes, verbal warnings instead of written ones. Pressure applied to people who didn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back. You've done this before, I said. He swallowed. I wouldn't say that. I looked at him steadily. I would, I said. He tried to recover. He softened his voice, adjusted his language, said he didn't mean to cause harm, said he was just trying to protect his investment. I let him finish. Then I answered him directly. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said, and ignorance doesn't erase responsibility. I explained the law once more, slower this time, so there would be no room for misunderstanding. Tenant rights are not designed to punish landlords. They exist to prevent abuse. They exist because the balance of power in a landlord-tenant relationship is not equal. The landlord holds the keys, literally. And when someone in that position decides the law is optional, people get hurt. Children lose their medication. Families sleep in hotels on a Tuesday night. Kids go to school in the same clothes they wore the day before, wondering when everything stopped feeling safe. That is what your decision caused, I said, not the late rent. Your decision. The landlord looked down at his hands. The interruptions had stopped completely. The smirk was gone. The man who had walked in ready to win was sitting very still, understanding for the first time that no amount of experience or ownership or calm delivery was going to change what the documents already showed. I delivered the ruling clearly and without hesitation. Maximum damages under the statute, not symbolic, real money, enough to mean something to a man who viewed everything as a business transaction. He would pay every night of hotel and temporary housing costs from the date the locks were changed. Every night the family was displaced because of his decision, he would cover it. The tenant's belongings were to be returned immediately, not at his convenience, immediately. Medication, documents, clothing, school supplies, everything that had been locked away from a family that needed it. And then I looked at him directly and said what needed to be said. If you ever do this again, I told him, the consequences will not end in a courtroom like this one. This record will follow you. Regulators will have it. Investigators will see it. And the next time someone files a complaint with your name attached, they will already know where to look. He didn't respond. I continued. You don't protect property by breaking the law, I said. You protect property by following it. And then I said the thing I had been carrying since the very first page of that file. Power without responsibility is abuse. And when children are involved, that responsibility does not decrease. It increases. The case was over. The single mother didn't celebrate. She sat perfectly still as the ruling was read. No tears, no expression of triumph, just relief. the quiet, slow kind that settles into your body after days of holding fear at arm's length. Her belongings were returned that same week, the documents recovered, the medication retrieved. The small things that had felt impossibly far away came back within reach. Her children went back to school, backpacks on their shoulders, lunches packed. The questions they had been asking, the ones she hadn't known how to answer, gradually replaced by the ordinary rhythm of homework and bedtime and weekend plans. She told someone later, not publicly, not dramatically, just in passing, that the hardest part hadn't been the locked door. It had been looking at her kids that morning and not having an answer. "Why can't we go inside, Mom?" And having nothing to say. That was the wound underneath the legal violation. The helplessness of a parent who had done everything right and still couldn't protect her children from someone else's decision to do wrong. The ruling gave her something back beyond money or belongings. It gave her an answer. What he did was wrong. The law said so. This court said so. Out loud, on the record, in a room full of people. She wasn't powerless. She was right. The landlord, for his part, left that courtroom a different man than the one who had entered it. Not because he had experienced a sudden change of heart, but because the story had already moved beyond him. Word spread, as it always does, with cases like this. Other tenants came forward. People who had received verbal warnings they didn't understand. People who had been pressured out of apartments without ever knowing they had the right to fight back. The pattern Judge Judy identified in one morning had been operating quietly for years. He had built a business on the assumption that people without resources stay silent. He was right often enough that it had become a strategy. What he had not counted on was one woman who showed up anyway. With her documents in hand, her children in mind, and enough courage left to walk into a courtroom and simply tell the truth. I think about cases like this long after they leave my bench. Not because they're the loudest. Usually they aren't. I think about them because they reveal something important about what the law is supposed to be for. It isn't meant to favor the person with the most property, or the most experience, or the most confidence in their own voice. It is meant to protect the person standing outside a locked door with 2 children and no plan, who did everything right and still found herself at the mercy of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to him. That's the gap the law was designed to close. Not always perfectly, not always quickly, but when it works the way it should, it works like it did that morning. One set of facts, one set of documents, and the simple, unwavering truth that no one, regardless of how much they own or how long they've been in business, gets to treat another person like a problem to be discarded. She wasn't a problem. She was a mother, doing everything she could, asking for a few extra days, and she deserved to be treated like a human being. If you believe the law should protect people like her, and not just people like him, share this story. These are the cases that don't always make headlines. The ones that get resolved quietly in courtrooms across this country every single day. They matter. Every single one of them matters.